Built by horse players for horse players, AmWager is designed for speed, power, and ease of use. AmWager brings CAW-style tools to everyday horse players, including Dutching, ABC Ticket Maker, and Pro%, an advanced betting tool that lets you assign weighted percentages and build multiple structured wagers with a single click. Every month, AmWager turns the odds in your favor with 0% takeout on select tracks. These promos offer you up to $100 more for your winning bets and giving you value for your wagers not offered anywhere else. Rated 4.7 stars on Google with over 200 reviews, AmWager is trusted by horse players who expect more from their wagering platform. If you're looking for better tools and better value, you need AmWager. Void where prohibited. For terms and conditions, visit amwager.com. Must be 18 or older, 21 or older where applicable. Gambling problem? Please call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY.
Betting, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Bet with the Best podcast. Its mission is to explore better ways to bet on races, to seek out new, successful players, and to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. Welcome to episode 57 of the Bet with the Best podcast. This is part 2 of a reprise of a previous episode in which we discussed with pro player Mike Maloney how to handicap and bet the Kentucky Derby. In the previously aired part 1, we discussed how to handicap the Derby. In this part 2, we discussed how to use your handicapping opinions to create smart bets on the Kentucky Derby. If you want to learn more about how to handicap and bet the Kentucky Derby or any other horse race, then you should go to Bet with the Best Media, that's all one word, betwiththebestmedia.com, to order my new book, Betting on Horses, at the early bird discounted price. Each chapter of the book focuses on a crucial aspect of horse playing as practiced by some of the most successful players of the past several decades. Featured contributors include influential authors and horse players such as Andrew Beyer, Stephen Christ, Mark Kramer, and Barry Meadow, as well as leading professional players like Mike Maloney, Paul Matisse, Sean Borman, and Jonathan Stetton. And even a younger generation of data-driven players, including Marshall Graham, Dennis Montoro, Keith Bush, and David Aragona. The book covers all major elements of successful horse playing, from race selection and value identification to pool selection, bet sizing, and efficient ticket construction. It also addresses critical but often overlooked areas such as bankroll management, horse player psychology, and even performance review. If you're a horse player, whether novice or experienced and looking to improve your game, this book was written for you. So don't wait to order Betting on Horses now to get the early bird discounted price at betwiththebestmedia.com. betwiththebestmedia.com. Welcome back to part 2 of episode 25 with Mike Maloney, where we're talking about playing the Kentucky Derby. In part 1, we covered in detail aspects of handicapping the race and identifying where your opinions were. And now in part 2 with Mike, we're going to talk about how you turn those handicapping opinions into good bets on the Kentucky Derby. And I will pick up the interview where we left off now with Mike and I talking about the Kentucky Derby. So now we spent the first part talking about handicapping. Now I want to talk about how you take those opinions. And let's see, ideally for you, you found 1 or 2 horses you can key on. You've kind of sifted through the rest of the field and identified the horses you might want to use underneath and exotics, and maybe even a few that are big prices, the chaos horses you talked about. So now let's talk about how you bet it. And I want to kind of talk about several other different ways you could bet. And I want to start with the win pool. That one tends to be pretty unique in the Derby. You can get some really strange prices on horses based on their names. What was it, My Boy Jack or some horse went off at 5-1 one year in the Derby, where he looked like he's 25-1 on paper. You seem to get that every year, a dollar bill or patch or whatever it is. horse. So you can get some crazy win odds. And it's that 20 horse field we've already talked about that kind of distort what fair value would be relative to what you're used to. So how do you attack that win pool given that and given, kind of typical opinion you'd have going into the Derby?
Well, I agree with you totally on the public tends to get off on some kind of tangent and overbets usually just one single horse for some reason. And it's usually a horse with a name in it that's a common name. There are usually two scenarios that will lead to a win bet in the Derby for me. And in many years, I will not make a win bet. But I'm looking for a horse that I have identified as by far the most likely winner. And if I get the right price, might even just be 5-1 on a horse that I am, totally convinced that they're the horse for that Derby. I have to factor in the 20 horse field. Yes, I have to do a lot of thinking before I make that bet. What odds will I accept? Not a lot of bouncing around at the last second. Usually in the Derby odds, it can happen once in a while, but you get a pretty good idea of what you're going to be dealing with, which is rare in American racing. You do have the Mattress Mac factor that he may come in, but you normally know what horse he's on anyway. It's normally not the one I'm on, so I'm insulated from that most years. But I pay attention to anything like that might affect the odds. I'll if I'm convinced enough that I'm getting the right value, I will go ahead and make a win bet on a horse, even if it's the favorite. The other likely scenario for a win bet for me is the horse that I, through my studying, have found what I think is some hidden angle or hidden to some degree that's going to offer value, and he may be 20-1. I will, make a win bet in a certain scenario there, knowing that maybe I have a horse or two rated above him as far as actual chances of winning, but the price is just going to be good enough that I can't live with myself if the horse pays $45 and he was my third choice, and I knew he had upside to where he could outperform that possibly. So those are the two most likely scenarios where I would make a win bet.
All right. Would you ever bet more than one horse? Say you had two of those 20-1 shots that you thought, just the same thing you just described, you had two of those. Would you ever consider betting both, or would you choose one? Or I'm just curious how you'd handle that, because this is maybe the one time you might consider that, in a 20 horse field.
I don't, just personally, doesn't mean it's right or wrong. I don't think I've ever done that. If I were, if I saw more than one horse that I was interested in that, in the long shot realm, I would probably be more inclined to get into the horizontals and try to get live to both of those horses. I wouldn't have any problem using multiple horses in the Derby in the picks, even in the short pick, like a daily double or something. I would just, all that is just always factored in on the actual scenario that comes up, and I'm always trying to tailor the bet to my opinion, rather than getting ahead of myself and I want to get into this pool. So how do I get into it? What horses do I pull into that? I'm always just trying to handicap the race, look at the board, and say, how can I take advantage of what I see that's out of line on the board?
So it sounds like you don't play two horses to win, but you might be keying those two horses in vertical or horizontal plays, or using them anyway. But it doesn't sound like you'd ever be playing, at least unlikely that you'd play more than one to win in that scenario.
Yes.
Okay, so what about place and show bets? A lot of people never make those. I'm included in that, but in a 20 horse field, on like a 20 to 1 shot, you might get a pretty nice place price. Is that something you would ever consider, or is it, I'm not sure. Do you ever play place and show? And are you more inclined to do so in the Derby than you would be normally?
Yes, absolutely. I don't play a lot of place and show, and in my normal horse play, most of that is done. Almost all the show betting is done like in some type of parlay situation, and I don't do a lot of it. The place betting, sometimes I'll factor that in. I don't like to bet the place, but in certain situations, I've learned that I will dabble in that during the normal racing day. As far as Derby weekend, one of my favorite things to do is to play a place or show pool, and I will vary the place or show bet. I'll determine that on how I see the race and how I see the particular horse. And a lot of times it ends up being based where if it's a lower price horse, it ends up being a place bet. And if it's a longer price horse or it's a really big field, it might be more of a show bet. And sometimes I'll even bet half the place and half the show. But I'll usually start out on sometimes anymore, I even start out on Thursday on Derby, and I'll start out with a smaller denomination and try to get something started on the cheap in my mind, a place show parlay, where I will that will carry over. It won't be a cash out situation at the end of Thursday or Friday. It will be something I'll be looking to run throughout the end of Saturday. And I have little things that I try to pull the initial outlay, the initial investment out at some point when if the amount gets up to a hefty amount, I try to take the risk out of it and just maybe play with the profits. Bad things can happen. Last year's immediately popping in my mind. Like most horse players know, we remember the bad beats at least as well as we remember the good wins. I had started last year on Thursday and Friday with better than normal success for me, and had a substantial sum going into Derby Day. I hadn't attended the Derby in a lot of years, and a good friend offered me a situation, seating situation I couldn't pass up. So I rode on a bus with 30 other people up with him, and we didn't get there until midday to actually get to Louisville. But on the ride up, had my phone on, and I get to watch my whole parlay go down in flames on Goodnight Olive to place. So, and if you remember anything about that trip, it was very
not a good trip.
Yeah,
it was not a good trip.
That's the kind of things, just like full disclosure here. That's the kind of things that can happen. But all in all, it's a great time to bet those pools, especially in Kentucky now, where you get full breakage, which in my mind tracks are still stealing from players the true value of their wagers. When a show bet figures to pay $2.39 and they give you $2.20 at your track or at your ADW, that's theft, in my opinion. So, and that needs to be changed. But Kentucky racing doesn't always make me proud, but this is one time they have made me proud, and that's a huge change and a huge benefit to the bettor. And it makes the placing show pools on Derby weekend even more enticing for a good player.
Yeah, I agree with you on the breakage. It's interesting. You kind of brought together like two previous guests that I've had on the podcast. They're thinking you brought together. Mark Kramer talks about doing a show parlay kind of the way you did, where he'll cash out his initial investment, and he'll probably even take dividends out if it starts building up big, just so that he doesn't, completely flame out. But, he likes to do the same thing you described. I think it sounds very similar. And then Maury Wolf always, said that the best pools, betting opportunities in terms of dumb money in the pools are, the Derby Day, win, place, and show pools. So you're sort of taking advantage of both of those, thinking of both of those. You're taking advantage of the pool with some dumb money. Now you're doing it in the state where they actually, give you the breakage, and you're doing a place show parlay, and I'm guessing you're trying to pick your, highly reliable horses in each of the races you're playing it in. So that's I've never done that before.
You've never done that before?
No, I've never. I don't know if I've made a place or a show bet, a real bet in a long time. I'm just more of a win only kind of player. So, but it's interesting. So anyway, you were going to say something.
Involved.
Yeah.
We got to get you involved. With the racing coffers in Kentucky need some of your place and show money.
Yeah, there we go. You might. I've always, shied away from that, but it's kind of interesting. It sounds like it's a way, maybe, if you have a group, to have a little bit of fun too with a low investment, and if you have some handicapper you can rely on to pick the right horses, you might have some fun building up your bankroll that way.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move. Oh, anything else on that before we move on?
No, I think we got it.
All right, let's talk about exactas and tries. I'm going to kind of group those together. You can separate them out if you feel like you want to. But, given your typically you'll have one or two horses you can key and some other horses you want to use underneath. How do you structure your tickets on exactas and tries for the Derby, given that 20-horse field?
One of the things that just pops in my head real quickly, this is just in the case that that I get live in a big pick into the Derby. If there's a horse that I'm really concerned about, that maybe I don't have covered, or I only have it covered for the minimum, and I'm going to make 10 or 20 or 50 times more if my top pick comes in. I like to play an exacta hedge where I'll take that doesn't take a big amount of money usually, to just bet a cold exacta with my, and I'll usually turn it for some amount because I don't like to lose if I pick the race exactly right. But I'm going to bet the horse that I'm concerned about, that I don't get paid as much with, on top of the horse I think is the most likely winner in just a separate betting event, just as a pure hedge. With the theory of, the first thing people say is, well, what happens if your horse doesn't run second and the long shot wins? Well, it costs a lot of money. It costs more money to hedge in those ways, and I'm not a big hedger to begin with. So if I hedge, I want to do it on the cheap, and I can do it on the cheap by taking that exacta. And my way of thinking is if the horse that I'm invested in and is my top pick and is my key horse in these scenarios is not good enough to run second, then I was wrong anyway. And I can live with the loss, or I can live with only cashing the minimum denomination in the pick.
So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying here.
Yes.
Okay. So you've got your key horse. It's probably not a big long shot that you're live to going into the Derby. It's your main horse you're leaning on. But there's a horse, maybe even two horses, but one horse, more of a price that you're kind of nervous that, man, if he wins, I get knocked out and I don't have anything. So you're saying I could bet him to win, but he's maybe 15 or 20 to 1. That's a lot of money to hedge, relative to what you could make on the pick. So I'm going to just play an exacta with the horse I've got live to underneath. So if I was right about him, but he does get, nailed by this long shot, I can, with a relatively small amount, still make a decent score. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's exactly it. And it's amazing in my experience how many times that has saved me from like a brutal beat. It still may be a brutal beat, but it's good psychologically. Maybe I just get, maybe I'm live to a $100,000 pick six. If I can hit a cold exacta, and I'm not just trying to talk big numbers. It doesn't matter. The numbers are all relative to what you're investing. But for whatever amount, if I'm live to a pick five or a pick six or whatever, and I can get 20% of that potential payoff, if the long shot beats my preferred horse, then that takes some of the sting out. Sometimes I've gotten 50% or more back on that hedge. So it's just a relatively inexpensive way for me to take the most likely bad beat out of the equation, or at least to soften the blow of that bad beat. This is something I think, a little aside from the Derby talk, but it's something that's really valuable for horse players. I learned long ago, the last thing I asked myself when I've structured all my bets, and sometimes even after I've entered all my bets, I ask myself, what's the most likely way that I lose? And that question leads me to a very smart hedge bet a lot of times, very inexpensive and very small. And I don't, why didn't that occur to you, when you were going through your bets? Well, you're structuring all these bets. It's the last thing you do after you maybe even entered the bets, and you look at the board and you have all the information that you're going to have before that race runs. And if you're investing a substantial sum of money in that single race, or you have substantial payoffs that are on the board on the will pays, it's just a good idea for me in practice to ask that question. And it's kind of amazing what your brain will tell you, how often that might actually happen, that one single cold number that your brain gives you as the most likely way that you could lose. At least that's the way it's worked in my personal experience. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It almost makes you think maybe that should be your primary bet.
Yeah. I know it sounds a little counterintuitive, but it's not my most likely scenario at all. It's that, a lot of times, maybe I need to give a little example to make it make more sense. Sometimes it's that horse that I know everything on paper says should be 20 to 1, and I look up and he's 8 to 1 for average connections or bad connections, and it just doesn't smell right. The sixth sense in your brain is kind of saying, you're looking at what's out of line here, and that's what's out of line. So, it even includes things like that.
Yeah, I like it. I like it because it makes you break out of your normal mode of thinking, right? Like you said, you get locked in. If you can do it, it might be hard to do it mentally, but if you can step back and say, all right, where's this most likely to go south? And then if you can identify that, and like you said, do it in a way where for a small amount, you can still cover yourself. That makes sense. I think the key part is, you're still not discounting your main opinion. You're just saying, where's the one place where I might be wrong that could really hurt me, and let me cover that, and cover it in a way where I'm betting it still, make a little by betting a lot versus having to spend a lot, on insurance.
Yes, and people are always wondering how you improve as a horse player. I can only speak for myself, but that idea came from I have handicapped a race backwards and forwards. I've spent an hour or two on this single race. I've grinded over this bet structure. I have done everything. I've left no stone unturned because I know this is my most serious bet of the day. I do not want to say after the race, Mike, you missed this. Mike, you could have done this better. Mike, you could have included that. Mike, you should have seen that on the board. I don't want those excuses. So when I finally began to hold myself to a higher standard as a horse player, that's where that came from. I don't want any excuses. I don't want to say you took a called third strike and you thought the ball was inside. I don't want any of that. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if there was any logical way that I could have saved my bet there, or possibly even made a little money in that race after the fact, I don't want to see it after the fact. And so that's where that question came from. What's the most likely way that you can lose? So it's, it doesn't work, it just rarely works. But when it does, it always is a warm feeling for me because it came from really trying to improve myself as a horse player.
I like it. And like you said, we got to continue to improve as horse players because the game keeps changing. And so I always like things that you do to challenge yourself to think differently. So back on the Exacta try, you talked about that hedge where you've got something live or how to hedge your main opinion, but how do you normally structure your Exacta and trifecta tickets around your opinion in that 20-horse field, the Derby?
Well, back to the same thought that we discussed earlier. I'm going to put consistency of performance. First, I have to find a horse that I like, that I think has the ability to do what I need him to do. But, in a lot of 20-horse fields, there may be, 3 or 4 or 5 of those horses. But I'm going to pay less attention to the actual price. I don't want to take I'm not going to take a dramatic underlay, but I will sacrifice a little bit of value consciousness in favor of consistency and liking where this horse in his form cycle, and liking maybe the even though the trainer may not be the most high profile trainer, liking, seeing a correlation between where this horse is in his form cycle and how this trainer brings his horses along, that those are in agreement, that they're both telling me the same thing. So first I want to believe in the horse that I'm keying. Once I settle on that, then I'm looking for value in the inclusions with him. So I'm not gonna, the objective at that point is not, I just want to cash the ticket. The objective at that point is, okay, I found the key. Maybe I gave up a little value there, but now I'm gonna demand the value on filling this ticket out, especially if it's an exacta. If it's an exacta, the value has to be there. In a try, I need some value. I'm probably, because these key horses tend to be on the lower end of the price spectrum. So I'm looking for value. Every horse I'm going to include in every spot in the try is not going to be absolute value versus, his win odds on the board. But I am, here's a scenario. Maybe I key the one horse. I think that's the most reliable horse. I'm playing exactas with 220 to 1 shots, and that to me is, I think we talked in our previous podcast. I want to use the lowest variance bet to try to lock up the value in that race. So if I see value in 220 to 1 shots, that's what the exacta is going to be for me, is saying, if I get exactly what I want here, I'm going to make sure I catch it. I'm going to make sure I don't miss the third slot of the try, and I don't want to use all. So when I have the opportunity to lock it up in the exacta, then when I go into the tries, some of the try bet may be a slight hedge against that. So I might play a ticket where I have the one horse that's my key with marginal contenders that could possibly be of no value, really, no extra value on the board. Have them in the second slot with my 220 to 1 shots in the third slot. So, I've built a scenario using exacta and try pools. Then I might come back and play what I call as a kill bet, which means if I'm absolutely right, I want to crush their souls, as JK says. So I might just play the horse that I like, the key horse, over the 220 to 1 shots and dare them to let that come in. Well, that's not going to come in very often, but when it does, I'm going to make a year right there. And then I'll flip that, because it's going to cost very little to put the key horse in second. And for some little token amount, I'll even put the key horse in third with those two, because I don't want the 220 to 1 shots to run first or second and my key to run third. And the try is going to pay off the planet and me not to have anything. So I'll do a little of that. Then I'll have the key getting beat by horses that, like, I might call jump up horses that I don't really like, but off their best race or off a certain pace scenario, they could possibly win. Or their trainer is on fire that weekend. I don't really like the horse, or the jockey's on fire, and I just don't want that to happen. So for some small amount, maybe I'll even put them on top of the key horse with the 220 to 1 shots third. Things like that. And that's just one example. And there are probably 100 different little techniques that I'm going to use. And I'm just going to decide which technique to use based on how I handicap the race.
So it sounds like for the exactas, you want your key horse, and then you're looking for value in the exacta. You're not going to play the key horse with horses that you don't think are adding much value in the exacta. But then when you move to the try, it opens up an extra spot, and you might slide into that extra spot some other horses you think are contenders that don't necessarily add value, but you're going to make sure you have your 20 to 1 shots in there with your key horse in some way. And how you structure that could vary a little bit, but you kind of open up that one slot for some other horses in the try. And you're going to have some where it's just pure kill shot with your value and your key horse, and then you're gonna have sprinkled in various combinations with some other horses, but you're always including at least your key horse is always in there somewhere, and one of your value horses is always in there somewhere. Is that fair?
Yes.
Summary?
Yes, because that's the only way I'm gonna, really pull any value out of the race if I'm keying a lower price horse.
So what if you have two key horses? The two are about the same that you think are very reliable. How would you differ that? Are you going to box that Exacta to start with and then start adding horses in with value in the try? I mean, how would you deal with that scenario?
Exactly. You got it. Box the Exacta is the obvious, and it sounds like childishly obvious, but how many times have you been to the track and someone has had that opinion and they actually didn't box the Exacta? I've been there. I've done it myself in the old days, and I've seen it done dozens and dozens of times, which is why it's good to have, it's good to think all this through and have a few sets of rules, a few guardrails, as we discussed before, to keep yourself from doing something that is going to make you want to jump out a window when you realize what you did. Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. If I like two horses, and even if they're both big prices, I'm gonna box those horses in the Exacta. I may pick out the one that I slightly prefer and make a win bet on that. I'm probably going to, if we're just talking about the verticals here, I'm going to try to be as inclusive as possible. Like even in this case, I might go for the lowest denomination, like we were talking about a Derby. I might go for the lowest denomination and try to use everything that could stand up in the lowest denomination trifecta, with my two horses in every try position, with every even marginal contender that I had left, just for the lowest denomination to start out my betting process, thinking that, okay, if I'm right about the basics of this race, if these 220-1 shots really are live and they both run, and any contender I have runs, splits them, or comes on top of them or whatever, I'm guaranteed to cash a ticket, which is going to be a monster for any amount, if, given that scenario. So that's the first thing I want to do, is take away the chance of me using all the horses but not getting them on the same ticket kind of idea. And then I'll go from there and I'll try to press my actual opinions, and maybe the horse that I'm the most afraid of, I might play it over my two long shots in Exactas, or come up with a try scenario where I hedge a little bit. But I want the bulk of my money. If my opinion really is that these 220-1 shots are both going to hit the board, then I want the bulk of my money bet with those 220-1 shots both hitting the board. I don't want to be afraid to win.
And the math sort of works in your favor because you're filling two of the slots up with one horse. So, you can include 10 other horses, and it's just, 10. It's just that's it. It's a $10, like for a $1 try. It's just $10 to have those horses underneath your two, and then another $10 to put them in the second slot. So I mean, it's not like you're getting that multiplier where if you only have one horse, that 10 in both slots is 100. It's an order of magnitude more combinations. So by having those two horses, you really cut it down, right?
Yeah, I think if you're betting a $1 try, it would be $20, like a position like that, if you're using 10 others. But because you'd be using your two on first and second. But
Right,
and
right.
Then you could split them for 20, and then you could put those horses on top of your 2 for 20. So you start out with $60, and then I mean, I don't know what the on Derby Day, there's just no real limit to what something like that can pay if you're right in that scenario on that day. So it's it's just the kind of situation, if I were, if that's a regular racing day and it's, 8-horse field somewhere, I might not take that approach at all, but, on Derby Day, the last thing you want to do is be right about those 2 keys and miss.
So that kind of leads us. Anything else on the exacts and tries before we talk about the super, which I think that's where the math really gets big. You've got to manage that, and the $1 minimum even forces you even more so to manage things. So anything else on the try or exacta before we talk about the super?
No, I'm ready for the super if you are.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite bets of the year, is the Derby Super, because of the $1 minimum, the large field. I really do think how you bet it is like much more important, or than always talk about how the betting is just as important as the handicapping. But in this particular bet, I think the betting's more important than the handicapping. How you structure your ticket, and you're one of the best at doing that. So I'm really want to hear about how you go about trying to tackle that $1 minimum super on the Derby.
Well, first of all, it's a different animal, and I like the bet also. I'm like you. It's a challenge, and it's kind of a unique challenge for us. I think it's the only time we play $1 minimum superfecta with a 20-horse field. So unless we're venturing to another country to bet or something, and my approach is I think you have to. You just have to take a unique approach to this bet. Even if you're betting a substantial amount, my opinion is you can't. It's a low profit or a low ROI thing for me to try to bet 3 horses in the first slot and 4 horses in the second slot, and feather that on out, adding horses as you move into lower positions. Number one is it's going to cost a tremendous amount of money, and number two, when you get into those third and fourth spots, especially the horses that, if you think back over the horses that run third and fourth in derbies, could you really have included those? That's what you have to ask yourself, that in that framework of a ticket. It's very hard. I mean, maybe you're an exceptional handicapper and you're really on that day, or maybe you just get lucky and it comes right, and that's great if it works for you. A lot of this stuff that I'm talking about are things that work for me, and it may have to do with my style of handicapping. So another person's style of handicapping, the type horses that they include and the type horses that they eliminate, my style of bet structure may not work as well for that person, just because they're not approaching the handicapping part like me. Whether their way is right more often or my way is right more often, it doesn't matter with the handicapping. It's that the bet structure maybe doesn't match up properly with the handicapping. So I want to preface all this by that. But the way that I'm going to approach the dollar superfecta is I just have to be willing to be wrong. I just have to get bold. And the boldness comes from at least 2 keys and sometimes 3 keys. So I'm almost always asking 2 horses in a 20-horse field to run in certain positions. And most often the framework that I use is my very top pick, I'm asking to be first or second. If he's not first or second, I'm out. And I'm also asking another horse to maybe run in the top 4 slots. And if both those things don't happen, if horse A doesn't run first or second, or horse B doesn't run in one of the top 4 slots, then I'm out. And I have to be okay with that. Now, maybe, what happens a lot of times is I might still catch an exacta or a try possibly, through some other technique. Maybe I don't catch anything. But in order for me to be able to bet the super the way I want, I have to have at least 2 keys. And that frees me up in that 4th slot. I can include, some borderline horses. I can move my second pick that I'm using just to hit the board. I can put it in 4th and use some crazy horses 3rd, where if something runs in that I had a hard time seeing, I want to give myself a chance to catch that. If the crazy Dallas Stewart horse runs in 3rd especially, I want to try to be there if I can. If the crazy Dallas Stewart horse runs 2nd, then that makes it harder. But maybe if my key horse wins and my second horse runs 3rd, then maybe I give myself a chance to catch that. So by using what I call a double key, some people, you will say double key and they mean that one of 2 horses has to do something. When I say double key, I mean both horses have to do what I'm betting them to do, or I lose. And I'm willing to do that because the payoffs can be so lucrative. The Derby Superfecta can pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it like Chris said earlier in the pod, that can be with the favorite or a low price horse running 1st or 2nd. It's sometimes if the price is big enough on the horses that fill the bet out, you still get a tremendous life-changing payout. So that's the idea. And sometimes I can even go like for some, maybe I bet half my money the way I just described, and maybe I come back and bet the other half or some other percentage of my money that I'm going to bet into the Superfecta with 3 horses running in. And then I may be able to include nearly everything except like the horses I'd be eliminating at this point would be the worst speed horses. The speed horses I think that are going to try to run early and then just get eliminated. I might be throwing them out. But in this triple key, I'd be using probably everything else in 4th and in 3rd. And I'd be using some crazy horses in 2nd in those tickets because it's not that expensive, because 3 of the 4 slots are keys. So different techniques like that where I'm trying to keep the overall amount that I'm going to bet into the Superfecta. I have to keep that under control. But I want to come up with creative ways to allow myself to use chaos horses, especially in the 3rd and 4th slot. And the best way that I've found to do that is just go with 2 or 3 keys and be willing to lose if I'm wrong.
And that gets to your point of those 2 or 3 horses. You're looking for those. You're not worried about price. You're looking for horses that are reliable and, the ones most likely to run well, and hit the board. That's really what you're focused on in those keys, right?
Exactly. And sometimes some of these key horses that I'm keying to just be in the Superfecta are, fairly big prices. It's not unusual for me to be keying a horse that's 20 to 1 or more. It's just that I see what I want to see in him, and I think he fits the scenario, and I'm willing to roll the dice and hope that he's able to dink in maybe third or fourth, even though he might be beaten 6-8 lengths or more.
Right. It's almost like you have like a primary key and then maybe one or two secondary keys, where the primary one you're sort of focused on maybe the one top or top two spots, and your secondary keys, you're filling out the underneath parts. But you might really lean heavier in terms of like one of those is the one you're putting on the top of the ticket for the most part.
Exactly.
And like you said, it's kind of like the math and horizontals. If you're only spreading in one race, you can be pretty liberal if you're like singling all the other legs. If you're spreading in two races, again, you can be liberal, but now, the multiplier effect comes into play. You're kind of doing the same thing as super. If you have three keys, then you've only got one spread leg. And like you said, you could like even hit the all button if you wanted to, because it's just all times, you've got those two horses, especially if you're like keying one of them on top. It's not that expensive to include a lot of horses in the one leg. If you have two legs, you got to fill out. You got to be careful there, because now you're, that multiplier effect comes in. Even if you took out half the field, and even if you had 10 horses in that, 10 in both legs, still 100 combinations, right? So, it sounds like, though, if you're doing a 3-horse key, you're probably not going to leave much out of that fourth slot in that your super on in that case, right? It's going to be close to an all.
Exactly. That's when I just described there, where the only horses I might be throwing out, and maybe I shouldn't even do that, but that seems to be something that you can get away with in the Derby, is the worst of the speed horses, tend to just be hopelessly beaten in a lot of derbies. So that, those are the type horses that I'm leaving out. And like you say, I'm including horses in the triple key that I would never be, I would never think it was wise probably to include them in the double key, but I couldn't afford to, even if I wanted to.
Yeah. And in that triple key, so in the fourth slot, I could see being real liberal. In the third slot, are you still kind of trying to use them all in the second slot
I'm trying to use that. Probably in that scenario, I'm using, at least as many in the third slot as I am in the fourth slot. And here's the reason, because if in that scenario, if that comes my favorite horse over my two next keys, I'm going to crush that trifecta. So What I definitely don't want is to run first, second, and fourth and have a horse run in third that I don't have, because then that wipes me out of everything. So,
and that's a good point. No,
yeah,
go ahead.
So
Sorry.
I'm just, you're right. That's a point that I've got a couple of scars on me somewhere, is how I got to that point. That happened to me, and I'm not super sharp, but after a while, that hammer hits me a couple times in the head, and I figure out a way to get my arm up before it comes down again. So that's all that is. It's just, maybe it's some type of hedge, but it's something I've learned over the years. When you're playing verticals, it's all interrelated, if that makes sense. Like where I just described how my exacta and my try are kind of interrelated. I'm seeing both of those as I'm betting the second one, kind of, or I'm seeing both of them as I'm betting them. I have a plan of, who to include and how to include that meshes together. And one of the objectives is to insulate myself from that bad beat, like we're talking about, where you run first, second, and fourth there. and maybe you catch an Exacta, but you're going to remember for the next 6 months, even next Derby day, the first thing that's going to pop in your mind is, oh God, how did I miss that Super last year?
Yeah, I can totally relate. Mine are when the unlikely horse runs second is a couple times that has killed me because I've had it in the third and fourth slot, but not the second.
Yeah.
And it's like 50 to 1 and it pays some outrageous amount. And I didn't have it because the second slot, I kind of had it narrowed down more, with my key horse and stuff. So that was where I've been killed. I can think of a couple times, and I think it might have been a McPeak horse once that ran second at a big price. Was a horse named Commanding Curve or something like that?
That was a Dallas Stewart, I believe.
Dallas Stewart. That's the other guy. Yeah, he ran second, right?
Yeah, he ran second.
Yeah, that killed I was all over that Super, and I didn't have him in the second slot. I had it in the third and fourth, but not the second. That was probably a good example.
I feel your pain. If he'd have run third instead of second, I might be living in a different zip code.
Okay, so we both share the pain on that one.
Exactly.
That one I remember well. And there was another one too that like that same thing. So I like what you're saying though is and that also gives you the the confidence to be aggressive in some of these pools, right? Because if you're playing the Exacta, the Tri, and the Super, just because you don't hit the Super doesn't mean you won't have killed it in the Tri or the Exacta or vice versa, right? So
that's right. It actually,
as a port.
I'm sorry. It actually frees you up to play more aggressively in one pool when you're covered in the other pools. So that's the game theory here, is because of the minimum is so high relatively in the superfecta that you can't cover for $1 superfecta. That can't be your cover bet, where you're covering all your outside possibilities. You have to cover in some other bet that's cheaper to cover, and then you have to really try to pick. You have to be, in my opinion, you have to be more willing to lose in the superfecta bets.
Yeah, and it's more like gravy. If your opinions are strong and you have a good, and you're right about the race, then this is your chance for that, super score. No pun intended.
Exactly.
Whereas if you miss it by a little bit, you could still have done really well in the other pools and had a good day. This is just your chance to turn it into a great day, right?
Yes. That's right.
I like that. So let me see. Anything else on that super bet? I can't think of anything. I was going to talk a little bit about if it's a weak favorite, but I think the way you've described it, if it's a weak favorite, then you might include it in there, but it's not going to be one of your key horses, right? So.
Right, but probably not. What I would be thinking about in a weak favorite is if I thought the horse probably wasn't going to run first or second, I might make a significant bet in the Exacta pool just because I know I'm going to get value. If I'm pitching the favorite, I'm probably eliminating all takeout in the race, maybe even more. So I'm a positive EV bet there if I'm correct about the favorite being weak. And if I think, this is a favorite that, if he doesn't run his race, he's going to completely blow up and be off the board, then I'm probably going to move into the trifectas and just really try to blow the place up by, getting this horse out of the trials.
And then you might even include him in the super because if he runs out, you've killed it earlier, and you don't want him beating you to cost you a big super, because we know the super can pay handsomely even with a favorite in there. So
right, especially in that triple key scenario, it's going to be easy for me to include even horses that I may dislike at their odds. I know they're underlays, but I can even include those in that bet, which goes against, gambling theory for some people. But I think in practice, when you're talking about a race like the Kentucky Derby, so much chaos can fill those other slots that it can still be a huge ticket. So I want to cover myself against missing a huge payoff because I didn't use a bad favorite. I don't care about missing a short payoff because I didn't use a bad favorite. I don't, if I like the second and third choice, that doesn't mean I'm going to go, I might move into a Exacta or something and just, take what I saw as clearly the next two horses against the favorite. But, if we're talking about the superfecta on Derby Day, you don't want that bad favorite to run second or third and just, you eliminated him partly on ego, and then they hang it up and it paid $50,000.
Right, and that can happen. And we've seen that before, where especially if the favorite runs second or third, you can still get. And even when they win, we can see. I've seen 5-figure payouts, and so. So I guess kind of what it comes down to is sort of like kind of a parallel with horizontal betting on the super, especially on the Derby when you got 20 horses that could run in any of the 4 slots. The key is really in the horizontals usually you need to have a few singles to lean on, and in the superfecta you're saying you kind of need at least 2, maybe 3 horses you can lean on to make the math work in your favor, right?
Absolutely. And the horizontals, the same thing. You're dealing with even on Breeders' Cup Day where you're dealing with those big fields, you get a few shorter fields mixed in on Breeders' Cup Day sometimes. But, anytime you're dealing with big fields like that, you've got to come with some race where, or some couple of races or whatever, that where you're down to 1 or at the most 2 horses, or otherwise you're betting some astronomical ticket, and I think your value went out the window.
So that's a good lead into the last topic, which is the horizontal plays. It sounds like you try to get live to some horizontals to your key horses in the Derby. Maybe talk a little bit about that. You're using all the pools, Exactas, doubles, pick 3s, pick 4s, pick 5s. What pick 6s? What horizontal pools that kind of lead into the Derby do you focus on, and do you play them any differently than you normally would, other than you're just trying to get live to your 1 or 2 key horses in the Derby?
Yeah, the first thing I'll do is let's use a scenario where I like a horse in the Derby that I've identified my clear most likely winner, and I like a horse for the horizontals. In that scenario, I'm going to go back to the pick 6, and I'm going to start with the pick 6 and just look at what my opinion is of, let's say, the first race in the pick 6. If I have a strong opinion in that race, or if I have a, let's say, solid opinion in that race, then I'm going to try to put a pick 6 ticket together. If I don't, there are lots of years where I might just skip the pick 6 or make some token, like really, really small, almost action-ish bet, just to say I bet one, in case I was just like out of my mind right all day. But a bet that really doesn't even factor into the daily limit. And all I'm thinking there, if it's a wide open race and I got to use 6 horses in the first leg of that pick 6, that's, I'm going to tie up a lot of money. And I still don't, I even if I get through that race, I've got 4 other races I have to get through before I get to my Derby horse. So for me, that's a low percentage play. yes, that could be one that could pay a lot, but it could also be one where you tie up a lot and you blow out in the third leg of it, and then you've kind of painted yourself in a corner a little bit. You've used a lot of your bullets, and you have nothing now, and nothing to show for it, and you have to restart in a pick 3 maybe. So you've really weakened yourself. So it's an important decision, and you weakened yourself in a race that you didn't like, which that's the part that I can't stomach about it. So I'd be willing to let the ego part of saying I hit the pick 6 on Derby Day, I'd be willing to forego that and maybe go to the pick 5. And, then I can get into a 50-cent scenario, and my coverage can be a little stronger. If I don't like either the first or second legs, if I don't like the beginning leg of the pick 5, then I'm not above going to the pick 4. And once again, making a 50-cent bet in the pick 5 where I'm just like, if I all my picks come in and I hit it for next to nothing, then great. But I'm not going to worry about it. I'll just put that little tiny ticket in and move, and then maybe I'll play the pick 4. Well, that would be really rare if I went past that. By that point, one of those first 3 races, I'm going to have an opinion in nearly every year. So at that point, I'm not going to try. It's not going to be like a vertical where I'm intertwining those exactas, tries, and supers, to all try to the totality of all those vertical bets are giving me an opinion and a chance to score out, and also a chance to protect against bad beats, all woven into those series of bets. That's harder to do for me in the picks. So I'm going to be real picky about, no pun intended, real picky about which leg I start my main bet in leading into the Derby. And there's enough money there Derby Day. It doesn't matter. You can wait to the pick 4, and you can still win any amount of money if you're right. So let's just say in this scenario, the pick 4 is what appeals to me the most. The first 2 races, I don't have a lot of opinion in the pick 6. So I started in the pick 4, and now I can generate a lot more power in those press tickets. I can have a nice cover ticket into my main horse in the Derby, where something, for 50 cents, something in one of those first 3 legs, some horse is going to have to rich strike me to knock me out, and so I'm going to be live to something nearly every year to the key horse in the Derby, and I'm going to be able to have some really strong press tickets of my top horses in those 3 legs leading into the Derby, to where, if I pick 2 of those 3 legs right, let's say, then, I'm sitting there with stacks of pick 4s leading into the Derby, and I'm still set up. Maybe I'm set up to cash more than the pick 6 is paying. That's happened before. So, that's an important thing for me. And that's something that I had to learn through time is, every part of my emotional being wants to jump in as soon as that race comes up for the pick 6. Because all horse players have faith in themselves, and we all think we can do anything and pick anything. But if we're honest with ourselves, we have, better odds in some situations than others. So, long-winded way of saying one of the most important decisions you'll make is which sequence to try to play the most money in. And I'm very careful about that on Derby Day, and it varies from year to year. And I always try to leave myself enough to where I can play a double if necessary, where if lightning strikes and I get knocked out by some horse that, maybe it's just the second or third choice, but I didn't like it and it beats me, where I have some bailout position where I can still try to get a double started and not be going over my limits that, and not be overweighting this horse in the Derby to the point where it overwhelms everything else I'm doing on Derby day.
So I like what you're saying is you're looking at the sequence, but you wait until you find a race that you have an opinion on, and that's where you're going to start your pick. If you don't have an opinion in the six, in the first leg of the pick six, you don't want to have to spread in that and thin out your equity. If you don't like anything in the pick five, if you do, great, you'll start there. If not, you go to the pick four. Usually by then, hopefully there's one horse, you like that race, and that's where you'll start the picks. And the other thing I think to keep in mind, and kind of think you sort of hinted at this, is the Derby with 20 horses is like 2 races in the pick, right? It's like the number of combinations makes it, the payoffs be similar to, like a pick 4 is going to be more like a pick 5, and a pick 5 is going to be more like a pick 6. So even if you're on the pick 4, you're probably going to be getting pick 5 type payouts because of the large field size in the Derby. And you're kind of willing to sacrifice, keeping your money tied up in betting races you don't have strong opinions on, to wait until you get into the sequence where you actually have a strong opinion.
Exactly, because what I have done in the past and what I still see people do is your opinion, your kind of target horse is in the Derby. And I see people bet they fire half of their bullets in a pick 6 where they don't have a lot of opinion, maybe in the first 2 or 3 races or in 2 out of the 3 of those races. And, it's very easy to get knocked out. And now you've lost the risk reward is just not that great. If you've lost 50% of your bullets and, you haven't even gotten to your key horse, that's just something, I think human nature leads you there, but you have to fight that. I think in gambling, your human nature and your human emotions are almost always wrong when it comes to proper gambling. So it's something to keep in mind. Another thing to point out is it just occurred to me that I've done this a couple times where maybe I don't like the first or second choice in the Derby. I just think it's totally wide open. But, there's some strong narrative about a horse or two that, this is a great horse. And I just don't see it that way. But I like the races that are leading up to the Derby. Well, that's a great situation to go, into the maybe the pick 4 or 5 and play lowest denomination, be selective in those races leading up, play multiple tickets to where if you're A's, if you can get through all the way, you have a bunch of horses in the Derby. If a B slips in on you, then maybe you have still your top 4 picks in the Derby. But that's a good scenario when you think the race is wide open, because if you get one $15 or $20 horse in those legs leading into that, and you get a bomb in the Derby, you're going to get paid. I mean, you're really going to get paid. So, that's another scenario that I use. It's not always like I love a horse in the Derby. So just another technique for dependent upon how you see the sequence leading in and how you see the Derby.
Yeah, so that's if you want to fade the favorite and you don't have a strong opinion, you can still kind of leverage it if you have some good opinions in the legs leading up to it.
Right. Or at least give yourself a chance to get there, because that, if you're right about that, that ticket probably pays several times what a parlay will. You know, that ticket could pay like your head's gonna snap back when you see the wheel pays and how much that's gonna pay if you get, you know, even one outside the box horse win in leading up to the Derby.
And that's even better if you do like a horse that's not the favorite in the Derby, right? Because then you're more likely to be able to catch those prices leading up to it.
Yeah, you're going to be, that's a, you know, and that's kind of a fun scenario, because then you have multiple horses, and your main opinion is you think the favorites don't have to win. So then you have, you know, maybe you have a fourth of the field, or you know, sometimes even a third of the field live. And, you know, if you're right about the favorites not winning, you have a decent chance to cash for a big ticket.
And that might be one where you could do a little bit of hedging if you get to that scenario where you're live to six figures on 5 or 6 horses.
Right. Then you can, you know,
okay,
you can take you can take the favorite beating you running second with the ones that are paying the most. Maybe you can take that bad beat out of the equation to some degree just by playing a relatively inexpensive exacta with the favorite over. Maybe if you have 2 horses that are paying way more than the others and you think they have just as much chance, maybe you put those on the bottom of the exacta to eliminate the possibility of your long shot horse that's paying, you know, a new house leading by 2 at the 16th pole, and the favorite comes and nails him in the last step.
Yeah, I could see that, where that would be nice if you had that covered. Anything else on the picks?
One basic concept, and the pools are so big on Derby Day. This is just an aside. This is not as important as what we've already talked about, maybe. But let's say I get the pick 5. Let's say I'm playing the pick 5 on Derby Day, leading into the Derby. In the first leg, I get the best horse, and he pays $20, and I have him like locked in solid into the Derby with every contender, even like on got some B's mixed in there, and I feel like I have every logical contender. I'm going to get live to what I'm trying to get live to in the Derby. I might go back at that point. I'm still just going to bet horses I like, but I might go back at that point in the pick 4 or the pick 3 and bet the horses that, you know, not try to cash, you know, not try to hope for another long shot, like any marginal horses that I threw in that weren't one of my top 2 choices. Now, if I like a long shot and he's one of my top 2 choices, he stays in. But, you know, horses that I threw in because, hey, this horse is going to be great value at 12 or 15 to 1. He's my 3rd or 4th choice, but I have to use him. I might eliminate those horses and press my top 2 picks in the 3 races leading into the Derby. This is just me, because what I'm trying to do there is I already have the price. You know, I already have enough of a price that it's going to make the bet. I'm going to make a lot of money if I just cash this. But now I'm going to take a little bit of money and I'm going to press my very best opinions, and they're in whatever price they are, but they're normally going to be lower prices, into my opinion on the Derby. So if I do hit, I'm going to hit them both. I'm going to hit the pick 5 and the pick 4, but the pick 5 is going to pay toward the lower end of the range of the possibilities of what I have live, of the tickets I have live at that point. And I'm going to, and what happens sometimes in that scenario is one of your top two picks wins the other legs. Maybe your horse wins in the Derby, or your two or three horses or whatever you have. And yes, you cash a nice pick 5, but it's like if you were going to cash, it's the least one that could have come in after the first leg where you got the price. So I'm not going outside my top two picks, but I'm pressing that up to where if it comes completely logical into the Derby, I have a little extra ticket that doesn't cost a whole lot, but I'm going to have it several times, and it is going to sweeten that up a little for me. And then if I get beat out of that pick 4, really I'm hoping that I do, because, if it's something I have, because if another horse wins and pays $30, then I know I'm really going to set up, and I'm not going to be concerned about the pick 4 if this pick 5 hits. So just, that's a little something that I do, may not be for everyone.
And that's when you catch that price early, right? And so it's gonna it's gonna pay.
That's only when if you could have picked the horse to win the first leg, that it wins. That's only in that scenario.
So you could have pressed it in the original ticket, but you might end up pressing a losing bet, and so this way you actually know that you can press it with a less amount. And like you said, if some of the unlikely winners come in that are big prices, then your original payout is going to be really big. And if it doesn't, it kind of chalks out more at the end. You'll press that and still made a pretty good profit. That's kind of what you're thinking.
Exactly. And I think we've all had that, the kind of the feeling of we played maybe $150 in a pick 5, and after it's over, we cashed it, but we say, I could have hit that for $25.
Right.
It was like all my top plays. So, you don't have it for, you don't have it for $25, but if you come back with this, especially when you get that, you're in my way of thinking, I'm willing to let my third or fourth choice win one of those other legs now without me, because it's going to help me so much. It's going to help me exponentially in this pick 5, and they're my third or fourth choice for a reason. I want to press my best opinions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't done that before. I'm usually going to press certain opinions in the pick 5, but I can see where if you've caught that price, now it's cheaper to press, and you could still, like you said, come out with a pretty nice score, even if it gets kind of chalky after that, assuming you caught that price early.
Exactly. Sometimes you might get a $2,000 pick 5 or a $1,500 pick 5, and you look back and say, yeah, why didn't I play more in the pick 5 is what you initially say. But then you say, it was either pick 1 or pick 2 for me in every race, but that's just, having that happen a few times led me to this. And I kind of like it, because I don't feel like I'm giving up much. I am, if the pick 5 pays $20,000 and the pick 4 pays, $4,000, you gave up that $4,000, but how much do you really care? But if the pick 5 pays $1,500 and your pick 4 you have multiple times and you cash out for another $3,000, it brightens your day. So that's my thinking anyway.
Yeah, it's almost like you're cheering against your pick 4.
You are. I totally am when I do that. As long
assuming
as
the right horses beat you. Right. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on the picks or on any of the betting topics? I think we're about through all the topics, except for one last thing I wanted to hit. But anything else on betting on the Derby card or the Derby, the picks into it or the horizontals?
Just one quick thing about there's so much. We all horse players anticipate the Derby so much in that weekend, and especially people in Lexington, Kentucky. But it's easy to get carried away. So it's important. I'm always stressing this, but it's important, more important than ever, to set a firm limit, have a plan. After you've handicapped the Oaks card or the Derby card, kind of pick out, have in your mind, what are my 2 best ideas? What are my 3 best ideas? And that helps you to allocate your money properly throughout the day. You kind of have a game plan. So I think that's more important on Derby Day, Oaks Day, Breeders' Cup Day than it is any other time of the year.
So don't just fire away. Have a plan and set a limit. Stick to your limits and stick to the plan, and you're much more likely to have some success where the plan is really centered around the top few opinions you have on the card or that series of cards they have. Like you said, Oaks Derby. You can even play Derby now if you want to play 3 cards.
That's true.
Yeah. And that's good advice any day. And that's what we talked about quite a bit on the first podcast that we did. That was some of the best stuff you gave, was kind of how you plan out your day. And you set those guardrails and the limits. And, that's really good. That kind of discipline that helps you be successful long term and keeps you from, kind of going on tilt or becoming, the classic degenerate horse player that's just firing away every chance you get.
Exactly. And unfortunately, it also, I'll just say this, there are times when you get out of bounds with some of that, and it can ruin the rest of your day. You don't want to come home to your wife or your girlfriend or your family or whatever in that kind of a sour mood because you're kind of ticked at yourself because of the way you handled it. The way to avoid that, or the most likely way to avoid that, is just to think about it ahead of time and have a plan, and and kind of have an idea, a plan. I don't know if that rings a bell with everybody, but kind of think about, these are the 3 target races for the day, and I want to make sure if I'm operating with $500 and target race number 3 is the 13th race, then I want to make sure that I have $200 or $300 for the back end of this card, even if I don't cash a ticket early. And very few people in practice will do that.
That's why your friends are always asking you for money by the 8th race.
The old saying around the racetrack, as long as your friend has money, you're never broke.
That's right. Okay. Well, I like to end on a positive note, and not that we've had anything really negative here, but a big score on the Derby. Share maybe a memorable score. It doesn't have to be a big score, but a memorable Derby score. And I'm sure you've had some. Just maybe share one of those with the listeners. And given that you've been playing this game for a long time and you're based in Kentucky, I'm sure you got lots of stories, but maybe just share one of them with us.
Well, one that comes to mind, and I'm trying to come up with one that I didn't put in Betting with an Edge, but one that comes to mind was the Sea Hero that we talked about earlier. I was in the Horseman's Lounge. I had a few cheap horses then, and I was in the Horseman's Lounge at Churchill. I parked on probably can't do this now, but I came in the Horseman's Gate early that morning and parked in the Horseman's lot back by the barns, and actually walked over the same walk that the Derby horses do. And then before the race, I was with a fellow that had been a bloodstock agent and knew a lot of people in the horse business. He had worked for Bunker Hunt for years. And we walked back and to the backside before the Derby. And we're having a pretty good day. And just so I got to experience the walkover with the Derby horses, just to see what it was like, figuring that I would never have one, which turned out to be correct so far. So, then that was an experience. And I'm sure you probably, security is up to the point where you can't do that anymore. But so we're in the Horseman's Lounge. The Derby's getting ready to start. We're going to watch it on the television there. At that time, I was recording my trips into a handheld tape recorder that just used little cassettes. And I would watch the race, and I usually watch it outside with binoculars, but on Derby Day, we're watching it on TV. I'm calling the trips into the recorder, and the friend that I'm with, Joe, is he has convinced me. Sea Hero is actually my second choice, and he has convinced me to that it was raining that day, just off and on. And he's saying every drop of water that falls out of the sky moves this horse up another foot. Any kind of moisture that's in this track, he's going to absolutely love it. Well, by the time we go out and look at him in the paddock and so forth, and I move him into, my top spot during the day from second, Sea Hero. So he comes with his run, Jerry Bailey in the irons. I'm calling the race, something like the 16 is 4T, means 4 wide on the turn. The 12 2T Vice, the horse is in a tight spot on the rail, or a path off the rail. And I'm trying to call 20 horses as they're coming around. And by the time the horses get to the 16th pole, it's obvious Sea Hero's going to win, and we're screaming into this tape recorder, jumping up and down. We've got picks live, we've got the Exacta. It was like my kill bet Exacta. We're going absolutely berserk, and he had not told me anything about this, but then he has a relationship with Mac Miller, and we walk back to the backside and are able to hear him talk about the horse and see the horse, and Mac Miller signed something for me, and it was just a really, it was one of the best gambling days I ever had. It was a great day getting to actually meet the connections, some of the connections of the horse, the groom, and so forth. And I kept that cassette for years in a move. Somehow I lost it, but 10 years later, I would put that. I didn't use the recorder anymore, but I would put that cassette in when I needed a little lift sometimes after a tough day at the track, and just listen to us celebrate Sea Hero hitting the wire.
Well, that was my question. If you still have the tape, I think it would be entertaining just to hear you trying to call the trips for 20 horses. That had to be a nightmare.
It was,
yeah, I can imagine.
The trips abruptly ended when they turned for home. I can promise you that.
Yeah, that sounds great. I wish I could have heard that recording. That's too bad that you lost it. That would be a hoot, I'm sure. Well, that's a great story. And I actually was screaming along with you for Sea Hero to win that race. So we have that in common. See, that's what's great about horse players. You share this passion, and you can talk back on races where you both had the same tough beats, or you both had the same, big scores. So it's just another example of, why this game is so fun. For sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, anything else before we wrap it up? Because I think we covered a lot. I think this is great. I'm hoping the listeners really appreciate it, and it will help them, think about things a little bit differently when they handicap and bet the Derby, and hopefully, maybe have some success. Maybe not this year, but somewhere down the road, and at least they have the Derby every year. So even if you don't hit it this year, there's always next year. That's one thing the horse players have to look forward to. So I want to thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it. This is great. This is better than I had hoped. And I really look forward to getting this out there and having the listeners and have the opportunity to hear your insights and your wisdom, and your willingness to share it is just really good. And I'm appreciative of that, and I'm sure they are. And I want to say thank you to the listeners, and may they boldly go where no horse player has gone before.